Imagine a night where every second ticks towards a nightmare. 8 hours of brutal, relentless violence, ending not in relief, but in death. And just when you think the horror has reached its peak, the man behind this atrocity, without a hint of remorse, sits down for lunch, as if the night before were just another ordinary day. This is not fiction. This is the chilling, true story of what happened to Saltanat Nukanova. In the heart of Astana, Kazakhstan, on a night that will forever echo in the minds of those who hear it, November 2023 became a marker of tragedy. Saltanat Nukanova's journey began in the serene city of Pavlodar, where she was raised with the promise of a bright future. Her early life was filled with the ordinary joys of childhood, but it was at the age of 9 that her path took a mystical turn. Gifted an astrology book by her godmother, Saltanat found her passion, a passion that would define her. Her education took her to Almaty, the former capital, where she lived with her brother, Aitbek Amangeldi, forging a bond that would see them through the best and worst of times. It was here she honed her skills as an astrologer, not just learning the stars, but also the art of guiding others. She began offering her services, providing comfort to women struggling with the complexities of life, be it in love, family, or personal growth. Her clientele grew, not just because of her knowledge, but because of her genuine care. Saltanat dreamed big. She wanted to establish an astrology school, a place where she could share her knowledge and help others find their paths through the stars. Her life was on an upward trajectory, filled with potential and hope. But then, Quandik Bishimbayev entered her life. Fresh out of prison for bribery, he was once Kazakhstan's Minister of National Economy, a man with a tarnished reputation, but an undeniable charisma. He pursued Saltanat relentlessly, starting with online messages, trying to win her over with promises and persuasion. She was initially hesitant, aware of his past, but Bishimbayev was persistent. He managed to get her phone number, and what followed was a courtship that was both intense and obsessive. Saltanat, perhaps seeing the potential for change in Bishimbayev, or maybe swayed by the charm he displayed, eventually agreed to date him. Their relationship moved quickly, too quickly, leading to marriage in a whirlwind of romance that masked the storm brewing beneath. This was the beginning of a dark chapter in Saltanat's life, one that would lead to a tragic end. Quandik Bishimbayev was no ordinary man. He was a figure of power and influence in Kazakhstan. Born in Kizilorda, he climbed the ranks of politics with the ambition of a man who knew no limits. By 2016, he had reached the pinnacle of his career, becoming Kazakhstan's Minister of National Economy. His tenure, however, was short-lived, ending in disgrace just months later. Bishimbayev's reputation was not built solely on his political achievements. It was also marred by allegations of corruption and abuse. Before his ministerial role, he held various high-profile positions, from managing director at the National Innovation Fund to chairman at the Baytarek National Managing Holding. His ascent in the political sphere was rapid, but so were the whispers of misconduct. His personal life was equally tumultuous. Bishimbayev had been married before, not once, but twice, and in each relationship there were echoes of violence, rumors of abuse that never quite reached the courtroom, but were loud in private circles. His first marriage ended quietly, shrouded in whispers of physical altercations. His second, with a woman known only by her first name, Aygul, also collapsed under similar allegations, though nothing was ever formally proven. In 2018, the hammer fell on Bishimbayev's political career. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for accepting bribes on a massive scale and embezzlement. It was a fall from grace that shocked many, but not as much as his early release. Just a year into his sentence, in 2019, he was granted amnesty, walking free after serving only 18 months. This leniency raised eyebrows and questions about justice in Kazakhstan. Fresh out of prison, Bishimbayev sought to rebuild his life. And it was then he met Saltanat Nukanova. His pursuit of her was relentless, a stark reminder of a man used to getting what he wanted, regardless of the means. But this new chapter was not to be one of redemption. Instead, it would lead to one of the most horrific crimes in Kazakhstan's recent memory. The night that would etch itself into the annals of Kazakh history began at Bao Restaurant in Astana, a place not just known for its cuisine, but for its ownership by Bishimbayev's relative, Bakhitjan Byjanov. It was November 9th, 2023, a night that started like any other, but would end in unimaginable horror. Saltanat and Bishimbayev arrived at the restaurant, ostensibly for a dinner that should have been filled with love, or at least civility. But as the evening unfolded, it became clear this was no ordinary night. Surveillance cameras, meant for security, instead captured a descent into violence. The first signs came early. In the restaurant's VIP area, visible on CCTV, Bishimbayev's demeanor changed. The footage shows him arguing with Saltanat, his voice rising, his gestures aggressive. Then, the unthinkable. He begins to hit her. Not just once, but repeatedly. The camera captures him punching, kicking, and dragging Saltanat by her hair. The brutality is stark, visible even through the grainy footage. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was an 8-hour ordeal. Saltanat tried to escape the assault, seeking refuge in a bathroom. But there was no escape. Bishimbayev followed, the camera capturing him breaking down the door, pulling her out by her hair, and continuing the attack. Each room in the restaurant became a scene of violence, from public spaces to private quarters where no cameras followed. The horror intensified as Saltanat attempted to protect herself. She was dragged, beaten, and at one point, when she momentarily escaped his grasp, she was chased down, the chase ending with her being dragged back into the room. Her attempts to hide were futile. Each time she sought safety, Bishimbayev found her. The assault reached its darkest point when Saltanat lost consciousness after being strangled. She wasn't found until the next morning, lifeless, in a room where the cameras did not reach. But the evidence of the night's brutality was clear in the injuries she bore. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a prolonged, calculated act of violence taking place in a setting where others were present. Yet no one intervened. The restaurant staff, other patrons, all around. But the silence was deafening. The night ended, not with the cessation of violence, but with the extinguishing of a life, leaving behind a chilling reminder of what unchecked power and rage can do. The night that would forever scar the collective memory of Kazakhstan unfolded at Bao Restaurant in Astana, a place renowned not only for its culinary delights, but also for being under the ownership of Bishimbayev's cousin, Bakhitjan Byjanov. On November 9th, 2023, what began as an ordinary evening would spiral into a saga of horror. Saltanat Nukanova and Kwandik Bishimbayev entered Bao Restaurant with the pretense of sharing a meal, perhaps hoping for a moment of peace or intimacy. However, the night's true nature soon revealed itself through the silent witnesses of the restaurant's surveillance cameras. The initial signs of discord surfaced early in the evening. In the secluded comfort of the VIP area, Bishimbayev's mood visibly shifted. CCTV footage captures him engaged in a heated argument with Saltanat, his voice escalating, his body language growing more aggressive. Then, the descent into violence began. Bishimbayev struck Saltanat, not in a fleeting moment of anger, but in a relentless, calculated assault. The camera records him punching her, kicking her, and dragging her across the floor by her hair. The brutality was stark, unmistakable even through the imperfect lens of the security cameras. This wasn't a brief outburst. It was an ordeal that stretched over 8 grueling hours. Saltanat, in desperation, sought refuge in the bathroom, hoping for a moment's respite. But there was no sanctuary. Bishimbayev was relentless, breaking down the door, pulling her out by her hair, and resuming his attack. Each room in the restaurant bore witness to this violence. From public areas where the cameras captured the horror to private spaces where the assault continued out of sight. Saltanat's attempts to protect herself were heart-wrenching. She was dragged through the corridors, beaten mercilessly, and in one desperate bid for freedom, she escaped momentarily, only to be chased down and dragged back into the room by Bishimbayev. Her efforts to hide, to find safety, were met with his persistent pursuit. The climax of this night of terror came when Saltanat lost consciousness, possibly from being strangled. Her body was not discovered until the morning light, lying in a room where the cameras did not reach, her injuries speaking volumes of the night's brutality. This wasn't merely an act of passion gone awry. It was a deliberate, prolonged act of violence, executed in a place filled with witnesses, staff, patrons, yet no one intervened. The silence of those present was as telling as the screams that went unheard. The night concluded, not with the end of the violence, but with the end of a life, serving as a chilling testament to the consequences of unchecked power and rage. In an act that would later shock the nation, the next day, around 1 p.m. on November 10, 2023, Bishimbayev, displaying a chilling detachment from the previous night's horrors, sat down for lunch in the same restaurant where he had committed such brutality. He was not alone. He was accompanied by a micro-influencer, Gulnara Nasirbekova, who was unaware of the night's events. They discussed everyday matters, with Bishimbayev acting as if nothing had happened, while Saltanat's lifeless body remained undiscovered in another part of the building. This lunch, captured on CCTV, epitomized a grotesque contrast between the mundane and the monstrous, showcasing Bishimbayev's cold, calculated demeanor in the face of his heinous crime. After the nightmarish hours of violence, as dawn broke, Bishimbayev's focus turned not to remorse or seeking help, but to concealment. His first action was not to call an ambulance for Saltanat, who lay lifeless, but to reach out to a fortune-teller. In a bizarre twist, he sought spiritual advice on how to proceed, a clear sign of his detachment from the gravity of his actions. Instead of alerting the authorities, Bishimbayev contacted his cousin, Bakhitjan Byzhanov, who also happened to be the owner of Bao Restaurant. Together, they embarked on a grim endeavor to cover up the crime. Their initial plan was to manipulate the narrative. Byzhanov, fully aware of the night's events, did not call for medical help until hours after Saltanat had already passed away. He claimed he thought she was just unconscious, a chilling excuse for the delay. The cover-up extended to tampering with evidence. Byzhanov deleted critical portions of the CCTV footage that would have shown the full extent of the violence. However, not all was lost. Some footage survived, capturing enough of the brutality to tell a damning story in court. Bishimbayev, for his part, attempted to concoct a story that would lessen his culpability. He claimed Saltanat had fallen and injured herself, a narrative that was shattered by the medical evidence and surviving video footage. His actions post-murder were not those of a man in shock or sorrow, but of one trying to escape justice. This attempt at a cover-up was not just about hiding the crime, but also about preserving Bishimbayev's image, which had already been tarnished by his previous legal troubles. The collaboration between Bishimbayev and Byzhanov highlighted a disturbing willingness to protect one's own at the expense of truth and justice. It was a desperate bid to rewrite history, to turn a night of violence into a manageable lie. But the truth, like blood on the floor of Bao Restaurant, was undeniable. The trial of Kwandik Bishimbayev became a spectacle unlike any other in Kazakhstan, marking one of the first times a case was broadcast live to the nation. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a moment of national reckoning over domestic violence, streamed on YouTube, where millions watched, waiting for justice. From the outset, the courtroom was electric with tension. Bishimbayev, once a symbol of Kazakhstan's economic aspirations, now sat caged, a stark reminder of his fall from grace. The prosecution laid out a case that was as straightforward as it was horrifying, using the surviving CCTV footage as their key evidence. The videos, grainy yet clear in their depiction of violence, left no room for denial. They showed Bishimbayev's actions in stark detail, from his aggressive behavior at the start of the evening to the final, brutal moments. Bishimbayev's defense was a dance of deflection and denial. His lawyers attempted to paint Saltanat as prone to jealousy and violence, suggesting she might have provoked the attack. Yet, no footage ever showed her attacking Bishimbayev. Instead, it was he who was seen as the aggressor. His defense strategy hinged on discrediting medical evidence that clearly indicated Saltanat died from repeated blows to the head, suggesting instead she could have had a pre-existing condition that led to her death. The trial saw a parade of witnesses. Aida Ahmadina, a close friend of Saltanat, testified about the night the couple left a concert abruptly, hinting at the tension that would lead to the tragedy. The medical examiner's testimony was particularly damning, describing in clinical detail the injuries Saltanat sustained, injuries consistent with the violence captured on video. One of the most gripping moments came when Bishimbayev himself took the stand. Initially, he maintained his innocence, but under the weight of evidence, he made a partial admission. He acknowledged beating Saltanat, but claimed it was unintentional, that he did not mean for her to die. His words, however, did little to dispel the horror of his actions or the calculated nature of the assault. The court also heard from those who were at Bao restaurant that night, including staff members who were instructed not to intervene or call for help. Their silence was as much on trial as Bishimbayev himself. The use of technology in this case, the live streaming, the CCTV evidence, not only ensured a transparent trial, but also galvanized public opinion. It forced Kazakhstan to confront the reality of domestic violence in a way that was unavoidable, turning a courtroom into a stage where the nation watched justice, or the lack thereof, unfold in real time. The loss of Saltanat Nukanova left a void that no amount of justice could fill. But her family turned their grief into a crusade for change. Her mother, with a voice trembling with both sorrow and resolve, spoke in court about the daughter she had lost. She described Saltanat's warmth, her laughter, and the dreams she would never fulfill. The pain in her words was palpable. A mother's love, now a mother's lament. Aitbek Amangeldi, Saltanat's brother, became the family's voice in the public sphere. His statements were not just about mourning. They were calls to action. He spoke of the night he learned of his sister's fate, a night that turned his world upside down. His testimony in court was not only about seeking justice for Saltanat, but also about preventing such tragedies from happening again. The family's anguish was broadcast to the nation, their private grief now a public fight. They stood in the courtroom, not just as relatives seeking retribution, but as advocates for a societal shift. Their public outcry led to the proposal of what would become known as Saltanat's Law, aimed at criminalizing domestic violence more effectively in Kazakhstan. Aitbek, with a heavy heart, recounted how he had to identify his sister's body, the physical and emotional scars left by Bishimbayev's actions. He shared how they had to fight for the case to be treated with the seriousness it deserved, how they were met with resistance and indifference from some quarters of the legal system. Their advocacy went beyond the courtroom. They lobbied for changes in law, for awareness campaigns, and for support systems for victims of domestic violence. The emotional toll was immense. Every public appearance, every interview was a reminder of Saltanat's absence, but also a testament to her enduring influence on those who loved her. In their grief, they found purpose. They transformed their personal tragedy into a national conversation about the need for change. Their fight was not just for Saltanat, but for all women who suffer in silence, for a society that would no longer turn a blind eye to domestic violence. Through their advocacy, Saltanat's memory was kept alive, not just as a victim, but as a catalyst for justice and reform. The culmination of this harrowing journey through the legal system came on May 13, 2024, when Kwandik Bishimbayev was sentenced to 24 years in prison for the murder of Saltanat Nukanova. This sentence, one of the longest ever given for such a crime in Kazakhstan, was a clear message from the judiciary. The era of leniency towards domestic violence was over. It was a verdict that not only punished a man for his heinous act, but also aimed to deter future violence. Alongside Bishimbayev, his cousin Bakitjan Baijanov, who had played a role in the attempted cover-up, was sentenced to 4 years in prison. His punishment was for concealing the crime rather than for the act itself, highlighting the complicity in silence and deceit. In the wake of this tragedy, a legislative response was swift. Saltanat's law was introduced, a direct outcome of this case, aiming to criminalize domestic violence more stringently. This law sought to close loopholes that had previously allowed abusers to escape justice, making acts like beating, unnecessary infliction of physical pain, and psychological abuse criminal offenses. It was a legislative shift, a tribute to Saltanat, intended to protect others from sharing her fate. Yet, the question lingered. Would this case change societal views on domestic violence? The trial, broadcast live, had brought this dark issue into the light, forcing conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces across Kazakhstan. Public outcry had been loud, with many demanding not just legal reform, but a cultural one. The aftermath of Saltanat's death and Bishimbayev's trial sparked a national introspection about the treatment of women, about the silence that often surrounds abuse. It became a rallying cry for activists, a moment where the collective consciousness of a nation seemed to shift towards acknowledging and confronting domestic violence. However, the true impact would only be seen over time. Would Saltanat's law be more than just words on paper? Would public awareness translate into action? The sentencing of Bishimbayev was a step towards justice, but the journey towards a society where such violence was no longer tolerated was just beginning. Saltanat's legacy was now one of change, a beacon for those fighting to ensure her death would not be in vain, pushing for a safer future for all.